By the time Uncle Leonard Hale said, "We've already worked out who gets what," the gulls had gone quiet over the harbor, and the house smelled like old cedar and sea salt. We were in my grandmother's living room in Newport, Oregon, a low cedar-shingled bungalow 2 blocks from Yaquina Bay, where birthdays had been sung off-key and storms watched through foggy glass. This afternoon the curtains were half drawn, and the light was the color of tarnished silver. It should have been a moment of reverence. It wasn't. Leonard stood with one elbow on the mantel as if he owned it. "Piper takes the house," he said, tapping the frame of a family photo as though approving a purchase. "She's married, she needs the bedrooms. Damon takes the cash accounts to jumpstart his startup. I'll manage jewelry and anything of value to expedite." His eyes found me, and the smile that followed was all verdict. "Lena, you're welcome to her paperbacks. And maybe the spare pots." Piper, in a linen wrap dress the color of wet sand, was already scanning the room with decorator's eyes. She murmured to her husband about knocking down a wall for natural flow. Damon scrolled his phone with the solemnity of a man pretending to read a term sheet, his sneaker heel bouncing against Grandma's old rug. The only sound that felt like mine was the soft rasp of Mr. Carver, the family lawyer, aligning a stack of documents he hadn't yet opened. "My name is Lena Quinn. I'm 29, an engineer who forgets to take coffee breaks, and the granddaughter who moved in with Agnes Hart after my mother died when I was 12. Agnes taught me how to pick crab without shattering the meat, how to read weather off a line of clouds, and how to choose silence that heals over silence that wounds. Leonard has told and retold a different story for years. I was the lingering responsibility, the sweet kid who never quite added up. Can we start boxing the kitchen?" Piper asked, lifting the corner of Grandma's quilt like a buyer checking weave density. I measured the dining set perfect for our breakfast nook. She kissed the air near Leonard's cheek, then avoided looking at me entirely, as if we were distant acquaintances browsing the same estate sale. Damon cleared his throat. "I've confirmed with the bank. Transfers should be straightforward once we sign. There's no reason to drag this out." He said it like efficiency was a virtue rather than a strategy. Mr. Carver didn't sit. He stood with his leather briefcase beside him, fingers folded on the handle, looking at the room in a way that said he had practiced patience in more than one living room like this. "We'll read Ms. Hart's will first," he said quietly, "and then discuss distribution." The word first made Leonard's jaw tighten not much, but enough to register. I took the armchair by the window not to retreat, but because that was Grandma's chair. She used to read there with a blanket over her knees, pausing to lift a finger at a bird call none of us could hear. Under the cushions, I knew a penny was taped to the frame. She said her mother taught her to keep luck stitched into furniture. The thought slid warm under my ribs. I curled my fingers around the small velvet pouch in my coat pocket and let the weight of it anchor me. It hadn't always been this open, the hunger, but it had been there coiled. Leonard liked to sit at Agnes's table and talk like a consultant with a fragile client estate, planning asset protection, streamlining responsibilities. His voice made help sound like ownership. He sent her articles about elder fraud with the important lines highlighted, then left pamphlets about power of attorney in a neat fan. Agnes would tuck them under the recipe box and change the subject to chowder. The day the coil snapped was 6 months ago. I came home from a service call and found Agnes at the kitchen table with a glass of water she hadn't touched. The summer light was too bright, and in that brightness I saw the tremor she'd been hiding. She pressed her lips together, offering me that practiced smile that said she was fine enough, and slid a stack of papers toward me with one knuckle. Leonard's name was on the header, but the letterhead wasn't Mr. Carver's. He brought these, she said. Said it was time I let someone qualified make decisions. He used that voice. The one that turns a mother into a ledger. "What did you say?" I asked, knowing but needing to hear it. Agnes squared her shoulders like a sailor spotting a clean line of wind. That if he ever speaks to me like a liability again, he'll learn what liabilities actually are. Her eyes softened, then sharpened. He looked at me as if I'd already left, as if all that was still alive was the paperwork. We sat a long time after that, testing the silence, listening for currents beneath it. She asked me not for the first time what I wanted my life to look like in 5 years. I told her about the little shop front on Bay Boulevard I dreamed of renting, combining a repair bench with a community workshop, a soldering station next to a kettle for tea. She asked questions like a cartographer, precise, Practical, careful about edges. In the months that followed, Agnes made lists. Not the kind Leonard liked with bullet points and dollar signs, but lists of secrets. She was done keeping the road trip. She took the summer she turned 19. The time she nearly eloped. The name of the neighbor who taught her to tie the perfect bowline. She also made other lists, quieter ones, and she started keeping appointments that weren't on the calendar Leonard saw. When envelopes arrived addressed in unfamiliar script, she set them under her teapot and smiled at their weight. "I'm not losing my mind, Lena," she told me one evening, flipping through a notebook of calculations she insisted on doing by hand. "I'm finding it." She closed the cover and patted it. "And I'm not interested in anyone else's convenience." Now in the living room, Leonard rapped his knuckles lightly against the mantel. "Let's respect everyone's time," he said, as if time were a commodity he had brought to the house and could distribute as he pleased. "Respect starts with listening," Mr. Carver replied, remarkably mild. He unsnapped the brass clasps on his briefcase and drew out a single cream-colored envelope. The room stilled in that particular way old houses do floorboards, remembering to be quiet pipes, choosing not to sigh. Piper shifted restless. "Fine," she said, and gave me a quick practice smile, a realtor's smile, bright and closed. Damon set his phone face down on the coffee table. For a second, I glimpsed his reflection in the black screen, a boy at a window before it fogs. I watched their eyes track the envelope like gulls following a tossing scrap. If grief was in the room at all, it had no chair. "Before we begin," Mr. Carver said, looking at each of us in turn, "I need to remind you that these are Miss Hart's wishes, not a negotiation." Leonard's mouth twitched something between a smirk and a wince. Piper exhaled. Damon's heels started bouncing again. I reached into my coat and let my hand find the velvet pouch. It wasn't heavy. It didn't have to be. Grandma believed certain truths didn't require weight to hold their shape. They only needed the right moment. "Ready?" Mr. Carver asked. "More than you know," I said, quiet enough that only the room heard me. Outside, a gull cried once, and then was silent, as if something below had shifted its pattern. Inside, the envelope opened with a soft whisper, and the day divided cleanly what we thought would happen and what would. The envelope whispered as Mr. Carver slid out the document and smoothed it against his leather folio. He cleared his throat not to command the room, but to give it a second chance to behave. "This is the last will and testament of Ms. Agnes Hart," he began, voice low and steady, "executed on the date indicated with witnesses as required by law." Leonard shifted his stance and adopted the attentive posture of a benevolent foreman. His eyes kept drifting to the curio cabinet, where Grandma had once arranged blown glass floats and a jar of sea glass that looked like captured dawns. Piper angled for a better view, crossing one leg over the other with rehearsed elegance. Damon pressed his thumb along the edge of the coffee table, the bounce of his heel resuming its metronome tap. "The decedent directs Mr. Carver read that her debts and final expenses be paid in an orderly manner." He paused for nothing and everything a beat that allowed the house to remember itself. She further bequeathed certain items and interests as follows. Piper inhaled small and eager. "To my son, Leonard Hale, I leave stewardship of personal effects and household valuables with the trust that he will handle the transition of such items with care and efficiency." The words stewardship and trust landed on Leonard like pins he could add to a lapel. He didn't bother to hide the smile. "To my granddaughter, Piper Hale Bennett, I leave my residence at Bay Street together with fixtures and contents therein not otherwise specified, with the hope that a growing family will fill those rooms with ordinary joy." Piper's lips parted. She didn't look at anybody. Her gaze sprinted ahead to paint swatches to a breakfast nook bathed in a light the house had not yet agreed to give. "To my grandson, Damon Hale, I leave my bank accounts and marketable securities to serve as foundation for enterprise and to recognize his initiative." Damon sat up straighter. If there was a thank you in him, it did not reach his face. His eyes tracked invisible columns, adding and reallocating. Mr. Carver turned a page. The paper rasp was the loudest sound in the world for 2 seconds. "And to my granddaughter, Lena Quinn," he read, and the room looked at me as if I just stepped out from behind a curtain. "I leave the entirety of my personal library, with special note of annotated volumes, recipe books, and the journals she knows how to find. These were our conversations. May they continue." Piper released a breath that could have been a laugh if it had more courage. Damon tilted his phone back toward his palm. Leonard let a satisfied compassion arrange his mouth. Across the room, Mr. Carver's eyes lifted briefly to mine, no apology there, but also no verdict. He continued through minor provisions, the music box from the top shelf to a neighbor who used to bring over peach pie as a quilt to the church bazaar, the china that only came out at Easter to a friend whose handwriting filled half the recipe cards. There was a paragraph about the little prize money from the county fair for her blackberry jam. Damon's heels stopped bouncing long enough to realize it was not an account he could transfer. When Mr. Carver reached the end, he placed a paperclip at the corner and set the document flat. "Those are the dispositive provisions," he said. "There are also instructions about the handling of personal letters and photographs which I will oversee." "Wonderful," Leonard said, collecting the mood like an usher dimming lights. "We'll coordinate logistics boxes, mover security. There's a lot to do and we're all very busy. After I file and certify as needed," Mr. Carver said, his tone fine as wire. "The court's schedule takes priority over any calendar we might prefer." Piper had already opened the measuring app on her phone. "Just making sure the sofa will clear the hallway," she said, breezy. Damon's fingers hovered over his screen, maybe to text someone that the runway was clear. I didn't stand up. I didn't make a speech. I reached into my coat and touched the velvet pouch again, the way a diver fingers the line that will bring her back. The fabric was slightly worn on one side from weeks of my checking it existed. Inside, I knew was a micro SD card tucked into a plastic sleeve and a folded piece of stationery with my name in Agnes's tidy print. When she'd given it to me, she'd done so with an air of household practicality, the same air with which she taught me to sharpen a knife or mend a torn pocket. That was 3 Thursdays before she died. The kitchen smelled like cloves from a simmering pot on the stove. The gulls were loud that afternoon, arguing over something sudden and small. Agnes pulled the pouch from her cardigan pocket and pinched the cord loose with her nails, as if untying a knot she'd tied 1,000 times. "This is for Mr. Carver," she said. "No preamble, not at the start, not at the end. When the room tells you it's ready." "How will I know?" "You'll know." She poured tea and let the steam soften between us. "He's a good man," she said of Carver. "He believes in paper because paper has edges you can see." "That's fine, but life has seams." She tapped the pouch. "Sometimes you stitch truth into the seam and let the right tug reveal it." On the stationery, she'd written one sentence, "Play me before anyone lifts a box." Underneath, smaller, "Let Leonard see your hands are steady." She didn't say much else that day. She talked about the shoal marker that had been replaced at the mouth of the bay, how the new one looked too clean and would earn its dignity only after the first hard storm. She asked me whether solder smoke made my eyes sting, or whether I'd finally learned the trick of the small fan. She told me the word portolan, which means a mariner's chart that accepts coastlines as they are and maps them anyway. Now the room gave me the sign Agnes had promised without knowing it was performing. Leonard took a step toward the hallway, clapped his hands once the way he used to do at family cookouts when he wanted games wrapped and dishes sorted. Piper announced too brightly that she would start in the kitchen because small things pack fastest. Damon said he'd call the bank to set expectations. "Before anyone moves a thing," I said, my voice not loud but built to carry. "Grandma asked me to give Mr. Carver something." The bustle snapped like a sail over-trimmed. Leonard faced me with managerial patience. "Lena, there will be time later for..." "For this," I said, and crossed the rug to Mr. Carver. I held out the pouch. It felt suddenly heavier, as if it had been waiting for gravity to take it seriously. "She wanted you to see this here, now." Piper's smile folded and refolded puzzled origami. Damon stopped pretending not to listen. Leonard didn't step closer, but his attention did. Mr. Carver accepted the pouch like it might contain a glass bird, carefully, respectfully, without commenting on its smallness. He loosened the cord and looked inside. The tiny card looked even smaller in his big hand. He frowned, then reached for his glasses, the ones he used to decipher birth certificates and deeds handwritten in an era when ink and certainty were cousins. "What is it?" Leonard asked the question too calm. "Media," Mr. Carver said. "I'll need a device." He glanced at the secretary desk near the window. Agnes's old laptop sat there, closed, a coaster beneath it, as if it were a cup that might leave a ring. "May I?" I nodded and moved ahead of him to lift the lid. The screen came alive with the default wallpaper. Agnes had never bothered to change a blue field blank as fair weather. Mr. Carver retrieved a USB adapter from his briefcase, of course he carried one, and slid the microSD card into the slot. The machine chimed a small acknowledgement, a sound like a polite guest clearing a throat. Leonard huffed a laugh that didn't know where to land. Really? We're watching home videos now. Is this necessary? Mr. Carver, if Ms. Hart gave a directive, Mr. Carver said without looking up, it is my duty to consider it. He found the drive double-clicked, and a single file waited in the folder. Bluefin Move. The name looked like an inside joke Agnes had kept with herself. Bluefin Piper said, trying to be amused. Is it about fish? It's about Agnes, I said, though I had not seen it. I heard the sentence with both our voices braided inside it. Mr. Carver rested his finger on the trackpad but didn't press. He turned to Leonard. Mr. Hale, nothing in the will forbids supplemental statements, and nothing obliges us to pretend they don't exist. He turned to me. Ms. Quinn, for the record, when did Ms. Hart give you this? 3 Thursdays ago, I said. She told me to deliver it during the reading. Not before, not after. Piper folded her arms. I don't see how a video changes anything Inc. has already decided. Sometimes Mr. Carver said gently, ink is late to what a life has already decided. He clicked. A black screen. Then a frame of the living room, not this one, but Agnes's back room, where the light pooled in the afternoon and caught dust like slow confetti. The camera jolted, settled. I recognized the corner of the cedar chest, the ceramic gull that had lost its beak long before I was born, and wore the loss like an opinion. Damon leaned forward despite himself. Leonard's smirk had vanished not from fear, but from calculation. He was measuring the distance between an unwelcome surprise and the strategies he trusted. The speakers crackled an old house noise, a storm on a radio 2 towns away. A throat cleared, a breath, and then the doorbell rang. It wasn't our doorbell. It was in the video. A bright, tinny trill that made Agnes's voice on the recording say off-camera, "Oh, that's the kettle," followed by a soft laugh at her own mistake. The sound was so her, it rolled through me like tide. Is this really? Leonard began. Shh, Piper said before she could stop herself. On the screen, a chair leg scraped. The picture wobbled. A cardigan sleeve entered the frame blue, the one with the frayed cuff I'd mended twice. A hand reached toward the lens, hesitated as if deciding whether to pull us closer or push us away. Mr. Carver lowered the volume a fraction of courtesy to whatever was about to enter the room with us. He didn't look at anyone now. Neither did I. Agnes's silhouette steadied into the chair. The shape of her shoulder, the way she squared it before speaking truth to people who believed they preferred kindness, these were a map we all knew, even those who had ignored it. Her face had not yet come into focus, but her breath had that unmistakable prelude she used when she intended to say exactly what she meant and nothing she didn't. Good afternoon, she began, and the screen held her first word like a door unlocking. Good afternoon. Agnes's voice was soft, but carried the way a harbor bell carries when the air is right. On the laptop screen, the camera held her in the back room where light pooled on the cedar chest and turned the dust into slow glitter. She wore the blue cardigan with the mended cuff and sat with her shoulders squared, a sailor's posture meeting fair weather, as if it might still change. If you are watching this, she said, then words with signatures have already been read aloud. You may believe they told the full story. They didn't. Paper is tidy. Life is not. No one breathed loudly enough to be heard. Mr. Carver, still standing, slid his thumb along the edge of his folio in a small circle, as if to keep the room's rhythm from racing ahead. Leonard folded his arms, jaw set, each muscle auditioning for authority. Piper pressed her lips into a polite line. Damon leaned forward despite himself, a finger parked at the corner of the coffee table as though he might flip the scene to a different side. I want to begin with clarity, Agnes continued. Yesterday, I reconciled my checking register with Coastal First by hand down to the dime. Last week, I adjusted my insulin with Dr. Cho and made her laugh by misusing the word glycemic on purpose. 2 evenings ago, I beat Harold Barker at cribbage, and he still owes me a piece of lemon cake. I can recite the registration number on the skiff we sold in 1978 and the tide chart for Yakina on a west wind. My mind is not mislaid. Leonard's mouth twitched. Mother, he began reflex before strategy. Agnes turned her head slightly as if she'd heard him through the years. Leonard, she said, voice level. You came to my kitchen with papers stamped by a firm that was not Mr. Carver's. You called it protection, and you called me vulnerable. In your sentences, my name moved further and further away from me until I was a column of assets and a set of tasks. I have needed help in stitches and storm windows and carrying laundry baskets, but I have not needed a custodian for my mind. Piper's eyes flashed toward Leonard and back to the screen measuring what could be salvaged. Damon smothered a smile that had nothing kind behind it, and then remembered I was watching him. Piper Agnes said the syllables clean as the snap of a bedsheet on a clothesline. In the last 36 months, you have come to see me 9 times. 2 of those were to borrow the sewing machine because your hem tape failed. On 3 visits, you brought me a coffee and left in under 10 minutes. I kept the cups in the blue bin because I like their weight. When your husband asked how often you visited, you told him weekly. You also once told me without noticing that my house would really shine with a knock-through. You were looking at my dining wall when you said it, not at me. The color in Piper's cheeks lifted and settled. She crossed one ankle over the other, neat defensive. Damon Agnes said not unkindly. Since you were 18, you have asked me for loans or floats 14 times. You called on my 80th birthday to say you were pitching to investors. That same afternoon, you posted a photo from the Pelican Brewery with a caption about victory flights. You gave me a tour of an app on your phone and forgot to ask whether my hips still ached after the fall. You once asked for $200 to buy your mother a gift and then bought scratch tickets instead. You called me the next morning to tell me you'd won nothing and to ask whether 200 more would double your chances. I told you it would double your regret. Damon tried to grin and couldn't find the muscles. He studied the black screen of his face-down phone as if it might award him a different past. Agnes laced her fingers in her lap. I am not saying any of this to win. I am saying it because pretending is a form of disrespect I will not leave as a chore for someone else. She inhaled, and for a heartbeat we were in the kitchen again listening to the kettle measuring our silences. You may worry this recording could be faked, she went on. That is a reasonable worry in a world that can paste faces to words they never said. So here are anchors. The water cannot move. She lifted a hand and counted off not for drama, but for order. Leonard. When you were 9, you chipped your back molar on the South Jetty, trying to bite open a soda cap because Eddie Rourke dared you. You cried and then swore me to secrecy. The dentist was Dr. Keegan, and he had a picture of a schooner in his office you stared at the whole time. Piper, your stuffed seal. Brine is in your closet under the sweaters you meant to donate. You told Miles you'd thrown it away. It still smells of campfire from the year the raccoon stole our graham crackers. Damon, you hid a fairy token behind the pantry baseboard because you thought it would be treasure later. It is still there, taped with cloth tape because I ran out of clear. The tape is striped, only I stripped the tape. Piper blinked twice. Damon's eyes shifted pantry baseboard map. Leonard shifted his weight as if a floorboard had remembered him too precisely. There is more, Agnes said gentler. I own things, a house, accounts, little piles and quiet objects. A will has been read. That text was a courtesy, not a conclusion. I wrote something I knew you could sit through without knocking furniture over. Mr. Carver has done his job exactly as I asked, and he did not know he was helping manage a rehearsal. Mr. Carver's brows flicked up brief surprise, then the calm of a man who has been entrusted with many truths he didn't expect to carry. He did not look stung, he looked included. The actual instruments, Agnes said, are with Elliot Marsh of Marsh & Wren downtown on Commercial. Their number is in my address book under M, as in Marsh, not under E, because I refuse to be tidy about everything. A certified copy is lodged in Safe Deposit Box 118 at Coastal First. Mr. Marsh is instructed to call the house 30 minutes after the reading. He likes punctuality almost as much as I do. Leonard exhaled a laugh that didn't reach a smile. This is theater, he said, shaking his head. Mother enjoyed a performance. This isn't how law works. Law. Agnes said likes paper. So do I. That's why there is paper. But character likes daylight, and I prefer to do both. The envelope you heard is light. The folders Mr. Marsh holds are weight. She shifted a small adjustment of the cardigan on her shoulder. Lena, she said then, and I felt the room tilt toward me. You will not like being praised. You prefer the work to the thanking. I am going to do it anyway. For 17 years you have been my daily companion, not my nurse, not my staff, but my person. You learned the sound a refrigerator makes when the seal is about to fail, and you oil the screen door because the squeak is too sad. You take apart lamps politely and put them back together with better wiring than they had when they were born. You have sat with me through sugar crashes and grief spikes and the quiet hour when the gulls seem to count themselves. You never once asked me ever what I would leave you. My throat tightened the way a knot tightens when it is trusted with weight. I didn't speak. There was nothing to add that wouldn't be smaller than what she'd made of the truth. I will say this plainly, Agnes continued. The real will leaves everything to Lena Quinn, the house on Bay Street, the accounts and securities, the jewelry box you once called a ship's chest, because it squeaks, and any other asset my name sits on when I stop signing things. Not because she is sweeter, not because she is better, not because I love any of you less than is mathematically decent, because she earned this by loving me without a ledger. Piper made a sound she swallowed too late. Damon's fingers began to tap again, and then stilled, as if even his restlessness knew it should behave. Leonard's color deepened, then receded, then returned a tide that had forgot its chart. This is not revenge, Agnes said steady. It is alignment. Had you shown up with casseroles and hard Saturdays and long afternoons of nothing in particular? Had you read to me badly, or folded towels the wrong way while I laughed and fixed them later? Had you asked the question, "How are you?" and then waited for the answer? Then this would be a different arrangement. You chose a different arrangement, and arrangements have consequences. We all live with the rooms we furnish. She lifted her hands, palms up, no flourish, just a gesture that said, "Here is the weight. Lift as you can." If you doubt this recording in the pantry behind the striped tape, you will find a fairy token wrapped in wax paper and a note dated the day I mended the blue cushion. Under the living room hearthstone, there is a penny I taped there the week Lena moved in because my mother said luck needs a place to sit. In the bottom of the sewing tin under the buttons, there is a recipe card for blackberry jam with a grease stain in the shape of Oregon, and a correction in Lena's handwriting. She changed a pinch to an actual measure to keep me honest. Only we know these things because only we live them. She leaned closer until the camera found the exact blue of her eyes. Do not lift a box. Do not move a chair. Do not put a fingerprint on any glass. Wait. Mr. Marsh will call at the exact time I told him to. Mr. Carver, thank you for reading what I asked and for not mistaking courtesy for consent. Her expression softened. For a breath, she was not a strategist, but my grandmother discovering a new bird on the fence. One more thing, she added, and her mouth curved. Bluefin was the boat your grandfather wanted and never bought. We named our hope after a fish. It was a useful practice. The video paused, not because the file ended, but because Agnes let the silence mark the sentence. Then she nodded once, a captain's nod to a crew that knows its jobs, and reached toward the lens. The image shivered and steadied. Her hand withdrew. That will do, she said. The screen went black. No one spoke first because there was no safe first to take. The house made a small sound, a heat tick, a pipe remembering water. Mr. Carver inhaled through his nose and set his glasses higher on the bridge. He didn't look at Leonard. He looked at the law he knew and the life he'd just been handed, and he aligned them in one practiced movement. Ms. Hart has described another will, he said quietly. If it exists, and if it bears a later date and proper execution it governs, we will verify. Leonard found his voice as if he dropped it and stepped on it. You can't. She can't. This is manipulation. Only if facts are manipulation, Mr. Carver replied, and even then facts are stubborn. Piper's eyes were wet with something too complicated for tears to explain. Lena, she said, half plea, half accusation. Did you? I delivered what she asked, I said. Nothing more. Damon turned his phone over. The black mirror of it reflected the ceiling and part of his face and none of the ways out he preferred. A clock somewhere ticked with the new tempo of the room. Agnes had said 30 minutes. I didn't look at my watch. I didn't need to. Leonard straightened his cuffs. We're not waiting for a prank call, he said, heading for the hallway, as if a change of location could change what had been said. We'll start packing. No, Mr. Carver said, surprisingly gentle. We will wait. The word fell into place like a brace under a listing shelf. And then right on cue, as if the house had been keeping its own ledger of minutes, the landline in the corner rang a bright punctual peal that felt both ordinary and impossible, as though time itself had joined the conversation. The landline rang with the bright punctuality of a harbor bell. Mr. Carver crossed to the table and lifted the receiver. Hart Residence, he said, then pressed the speaker button so the room could hear itself be addressed. This is Elliot Marsh from Marsh & Wren, a crisp voice announced. Am I speaking with the family of Ms. Agnes Hart and with Mr. Carver? You are, Mr. Carver said. We're assembled. Good. Ms. Hart instructed me to call 30 minutes after the will was read. Marsh continued. I hold a later properly executed will and supporting documents, including a letter to the court and copies lodged in safe deposit box 118 at Coastal First. My office will file a notice and petition for probate in the morning. In the interim, I need to be explicit. No items leave the residence. Leonard's laugh tried for suave and landed on strained. Mr. Marsh, this is irregular. It's ordinary, Marsh said not unkindly. Property remains in the estate until the court recognizes the personal representative. Moving assets now would at best be premature, at worst conversion. Mr. Carver, you'll ensure the premises are secured. Yes, Mr. Carver said. They will be. Marsh's tone softened a degree. Ms. Quinn, I'm here, I said, as primary beneficiary under Ms. Hart's later will. You'll need identification, he said. Please arrive at my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. We'll verify the instrument review duties and arrange access to the box. I will also provide courtesy copies to other interested parties. Mr. Hale, he added, you are welcome to bring counsel. Silence, then the click of a tooth against Leonard's tongue. We'll see you at 9. Thank you, Marsh said, and Mr. Carver, Agnes spoke highly of your steadiness. The line clicked. The room, newly shaped by the word later, remembered how to breathe. Damon flipped his phone face down again as if to pin it. Piper's measuring app glowed for a second, then dimmed in her palm. Leonard looked toward the hallway, the way a man looks at a tide that will not shift because he commands it to. Mr. Carver closed his folio. No more movement today, he said gently. We'll reconvene tomorrow. No one argued. We just stood in the seam Agnes had made between the rehearsal and the reel. The morning in Marsh & Wren smelled like lemon oil and old bindings. Framed nautical charts lined the hallway. A portolan map hung behind the receptionist's compass. Roses unfurling like small suns. Marsh himself was lean gray at the temples, his suit the calm of a man who preferred paper to theater, but knew how to stand in both. He greeted each of us by name. Ms. Quinn, Mr. Hale, Ms. Hale Bennett, Mr. Hale, Mr. Carver. He set a cream folder on the table and slid out a document with ribbon tabs. This is Ms. Hart's last will and testament, executed on the date shown witnessed and notarized. You will note the dispositive provisions differ materially from the document read yesterday. He read clear and spare. Small bequests went first, the music box to the neighbor with the peach pies, the china to a friend whose handwriting filled Agnes's recipes, a cash gift to the library for large print mysteries so nobody with tired eyes has to guess at the culprit. And then, I give device and bequeath the residue of my estate, including my residence at Bay Street, all accounts and securities, tangible personal property not otherwise disposed of, and all accretions thereto to my granddaughter Lena Quinn. Leonard's jaw worked. The sound of it was the only argument he had at volume. Piper stared at a point just over Marsh's shoulder, as if favorite paint colors were dissolving on a tide chart. Damon's heel began its old bounce, then stilled when Marsh kept reading. I direct that no person shall remove household goods or fixtures prior to qualification of my personal representative. I appoint Lena Quinn as personal representative. If she declines, I nominate Elliot Marsh. Mr. Carver examined signatures with a craftsman's respect. Properly executed, he said. I have no basis to contest authenticity. Marsh nodded. Copies will be filed today. The court will issue letters. Ms. Quinn, there will be inventories, notices, taxes, and rattier paperwork than anyone deserves. We'll pace it. I can pace, I said and meant it. Leonard leaned forward. We will contest. You may, Marsh said. But understand, Ms. Hart's capacity will be presumed if the execution formalities are met and her recording substantially corroborates intent. A contest is a choice about time and money. It is not an eraser. Leonard sat back. He looked older in that moment, as if a lens had been wiped and revealed a simpler math. What a life had added up to and what it hadn't. Piper broke first. Lena, she said quietly, I said the wall would look better knocked through. Her lips pressed together. I didn't ask where the table would go after. I'm sorry. She slid a stuffed seal from her bag. Brine, its fur flattened its face, still earnest. Would you keep this safe for a while? Miles thinks I threw it out. I don't want to lie to him anymore. I took Brine. I'll keep him until you're ready. Damon cleared his throat. I can help with the inventory. He offered. Eyes lowered. Real help. Lists, photos, serial numbers. No shortcuts. He glanced at me, then away. I could use a job where the numbers aren't imaginary. Come by Saturday, I said. We'll start in the shed. Bring work boots. Mr. Carver arranged a stack of forms in front of me. Initial here and here, he said, gentle as rain. Marsh scheduled the trip to the bank. Our pens moved. The room made the particular sound of things becoming official. Weeks softened into a new tide. We opened the house slowly, rooms breathing out stories as we named and placed them. Under the hearthstone, we found the penny tape browned with age. We left it exactly where it had always held its post. Behind the pantry baseboard, Damon found the fairy token wrapped in wax paper under striped cloth tape. He didn't pocket it. He set it on the counter with a small nod and wrote it on the inventory, his letters careful, his numbers checked twice. Leonard hired a lawyer. There were letters, then fewer letters, then silence. Rumors flickered at the yacht club. Some clients asked questions he didn't like the shape of. He stopped by the house once to drop off a casserole he hadn't made and left before I reached the door. The next time he came without casserole, and with his eyes less sure of themselves. He stood on the porch and said Mother could be theatrical. He swallowed. She was also rarely wrong. That was all. It was enough for that day. Piper visited on Thursdays with coffee she stayed to drink. She held up curtains to the light and didn't measure a single wall. She asked about the gulls, whether they always sounded like laughter, or only when you'd chosen to hear it that way. Sometimes she left with a small bag of recipe cards to copy and return. Sometimes she left with empty hands and a quieter face. Damon showed up on Saturdays in boots that scuffed fast. He learned to label boxes the way Agnes would have approved specific neat no lies. He replaced the screen door spring and asked me to inspect the tension like I was teaching him a new alphabet. Once on the porch, he started to say, about the scratch tickets, and I said, learned, and he said, learning, and for once we both meant now, not later. When the court issued letters, we said about the formal chores, accounts closed, taxes paid, bequests delivered. I opened a modest community workshop on Bay Boulevard, half repair bench, half classroom soldering irons lined up like well-behaved lighthouses. I hung a portolan chart over the work table. The sign above the door read Bluefin, the lettering, hand-painted the F stitched with a tiny compass rose. On the wall, in a small frame, the velvet pouch flattened, the micro SD sleeve with its label, a note in Agnes's tidy print, play me before anyone lifts a box. People asked about it. I said it was a story about weight and water, about how some truths weigh nothing and still hold a house up, and how some tides once named no longer frighten the boats. Sometimes at closing, I walk back to Bay Street and sit in Grandma's chair. The penny still underfoot, the screen door oiled against sad noises. If the wind is right, the gulls quiet and the harbor settles into the blue. Agnes liked best. I say the name Bluefin out loud and let it be what she taught it to be, hope you are willing to work for. The house answers the way old houses do when you keep your bargains with a small, approving silence that sounds a lot like a life aligned. The evening thinned into crickets and the soft clink of plates. We stayed. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.